Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 10 Man Collections. And today I'll be reading a chapter out of the South Carolina Ghost from the Coast to the Mountains book by Nancy Roberts. And today it's going to be the mysterious mysterious lands in light. So here we go. The visitor to the South Carolina Low Country comes away with memories of proud plantation homes, avenues of oaks, magnificent column residence on East Bay or the Battery, rows of rainbow-hued townhouses, elegant food, and colorful, turbulent black women selling their beautiful baskets produced for generations along the coast. They are seldom aware of the bedrock of superstition and the stories of the supernatural embedded deep in the life patterns of many South Carolinians. This is a state where people feel strongly about everything. Their politics, their history, and their ghosts. There is the unspoken influence of the conjure or root doctor, the plant eye or ghost dog, and the shutters and doors painted blue to keep our ghosts and spirits. In almost every town, there is some ghostly phenomenon that defies explanation, and this is the case at St. Helens Island near Beaufort. In early April of 1982, I began intensive research on this book, and as often occurs, while researching one story, I was told about another. D. Fitzsimmons, a young policewoman at Hilton Head Island, had formerly been stationed at Beaufort. One night, when she was off duty, she drove off to St. Helens Island to look for the famous light, but saw nothing. If it was a ghost light, I don't want to be looking for it anyway. Her next trip was another story. She had been visiting a friend on St. Helens, and as she was driving down Lane's End Road, she was amazed to see a light appear with a startling, fiery flash go right through the car ahead of her and dart off to the right, where it was lost in the woods beside the road. Dee knew that she had seen the mysterious light, but she had not anticipated being so scared. No matter how she tried to find a rational explanation, she could not. And for a practical young woman who asked questions, received sensational answers, and dealt in the concrete world of law enforcement, an experience she could not explain was unnerving. That night, she returned to her trailer home and sat down to read and relax. Since she was unable to sleep, she read longer than she intended. Had not been for her wakefulness, she probably would not have heard the light sound of footsteps outside her trailer. She went to the kitchen, which was in darkness, and pulled the curtain aside very slightly. A few feet away stood a strange man. Ordinarily, the young policewoman would have been more aggressive and handled the situation herself, but the experience of the light, coupled with that of a would-be intruder, was more than her nerves were up to that night. She called the police to come check. Dee laughs about that now, but she does not laugh about seeing the Beaufort light. It was real, and I'll never forget it. If I had any doubts about including the story of the light in the book, they were gone after a conversation with the Hilton Head fire chief. First talked of the Blue Lady of the Hilton Head. He had heard of her but never seen her. If I seen her, I probably know. But he had seen the Beaufort light. But now my interest was thoroughly aroused, and I decided to drive over to Bedford. By the time we arrived, I was tired. It was the end of a long day with two fascinating Hilton Head ghost stories for my efforts. A good book in my motel room bed held more appeal at the moment than a ghost light. Somewhere out on a country road, even ghost hunting has its doldrums, and my enthusiasm of the afternoon had fled. If it had not been for a certain tendency of purpose that sometimes drives me beyond the bounds of both common sense of fatigue, I would have said two ghosts were enough for one day and headed for our motel. Instead, it was on to St. Helena. Crossing the bridge at Bedford, we drove on until we reached a tiny community called Frogmore. Our instructions from the policewoman and the fireman had been to turn right at a sign which would say Lanes End Road. In the morning, the name of the road would have been commonplace. At night, it had a disquieting ring of finality. But what was there to fear? A ghost light, some say, was caused by a Confederate soldier who, decapitated by Union forces, continued to hunt for his head. Kind of like a headless horseman thing right there. But anyway, I have heard likelier stories than this. Surely he was a real bumbler. If he had not found it after a century and permanently retired to the world beyond. On the other hand, there was a story of a bus full of migrant workers coming home after dusk. A fight on the bus and a distracted driver who ran the bus squarely into one of the gigantic live oak trees beside the road, killing himself and several passengers. Which story was true, or was either? There was a place I had been told was a good place to park, but I couldn't seem to find it. A country store came up on my left, but I didn't stop. The fireman had mentioned an old church called the Chapel of Ease. Perhaps it was there we were to park and wait for the light to appear. Good. It must be the white building gleaming in the moonlight. I pulled the car over to the left and into what I believe was a churchyard, but there was a shock awaiting me. Now, the moon had passed from beneath its cloud cover and shone upon the most eerie ruins I had ever seen, and there were in the midst of them, on one side, the ragged white shell of an old chapel, its windows mere empty dark holes. On the right was an ancient cemetery unused for years, and set off apart from the place of the living and the dead was a dark mausoleum with a black hole gouged in its front. By those who would rob a family tomb, what a place to stay and away the arrival of a ghost like that. They probably got to torment you, say you better not rob this place. Anyway, our stay must have been no more than a quarter of an hour, but it seemed an eternity. We continued down the road all the way to Land's End, a turn to the right, and we were headed toward the old fort. Was night ready? The time to visit it? A reporter at the Bedford paper had mentioned that sometimes the light had been seen wandering about the fort. There was a great dark entrance above it. The sheer concrete walls were full of shadowy shapes outlined by artful strokes of moonlight. Did the light appear along the crest of the fort with the woods and sea beyond? Did it rise from the water and drift upward through the trees? I was midway up the rugs of an iron ladder embedded in the wall of the old fort when a cloud passed over the moon, leaving all in utter blackness. The thick human darkness so dense it became a heavy, smothering cloak. I had reached the top of the ladder, but could not see enough to risk exploring further. Below was the steep drop to the floor of the fort. Before me was the forest. Suddenly I heard an incredibly weird sound. A high-pitched shriek rose to a startling crescendo and then faded in the air. Every tiny hair of my body rose as I was chilled to the bone, despite the summer night's heat. Was there really a ghost of a man who had lost his head somewhere or out here? Perhaps nearby. The moon came out again, and there was a ghost here at this fort or in the woods. At least we would not meet in that impenetrable blackness. There was the path through the woods. Below lay the water with a trail of moonlight across it. There was no sign of the light. I think I'm going to stop it right here and do a part 2. So stay tuned for that. All right.